Welcome back to the Reier on YouTube channel. Travis Reier in the aftermath of Alabama 63, Western Kentucky 0, win number one, game number one for Kalen DeBoer as the successor to Nick Saban. And we've got a lot to talk about on the program. We are live, so if you'd like to jump on board in the chat, let us know what you're thinking after game one of the DeBoer tenure. Boy, fireworks aplenty, I'd say, right? Couple of takeaways for the defense. Keon Sabb is your front runner, early front runner for the Jim Thorpe Award at this point with those two picks in the first quarter. And look, there were some not so good things. It still is a season opener. It still is game one for a new regime. So you anticipated some hiccups there, here, and there were penalties, certainly teaching tape for Kalen DeBoer coming out of his debut in the days and weeks following the WKU game. You got South Florida coming up next weekend. And of course, a road trip that a lot of people will be anticipating in a couple of Saturdays to the University of Wisconsin. But as for Saturday night at Bryant-Denny Stadium, pretty much what you would want to see, pretty much what you anticipated seeing, I would think, from an offensive perspective. Explosive plays. Alabama ran 21 plays in the first half. Still scored what? 42 points? Pretty good ratio. Also averaged 17 yards per play. Jalen Milroe in the first half averaged 28 yards per pass attempt. And what about Ryan Williams? Wasting no time as a true freshman, a 17-year-old at that. 2 catches, 139 yards, and 2 touchdowns. So the ratios were pretty good in some areas of the offense. We'll talk about the run game a little bit, but it really was kind of just a bizarre start in a lot of ways. It just couldn't be without some turbulence, right? And going to Kalen DeBoer, you had the delay with the headsets. And I just tuned in, by the way, to Kalen DeBoer's press conference. So he offered kind of an explanation on what was going on there. Western Kentucky's headsets were not working. So the Alabama staff was forced to take off their headsets for those few moments. That led to, some upheaval with the coaching staff. Nick Sheridan's typically upstairs. He has to come downstairs now because there's no communication from the press box, or there didn't appear to be that there was going to be for perhaps an extended period of time. Boy, you had Caden Proctor go out before the game even started. So before the opening kickoff, before the opening snap, I guess, more like it, you had headsets out, Caden Proctor out at left tackle with what looked to be a left shoulder injury. Kalen DeBoer in the post game did say it's something that they'll evaluate, obviously, more in depth tomorrow and see where it takes them from there. But Elijah Pritchett has to jump in as the starter at left tackle. Kalen talked about this a little bit post game too, how that competition at right tackle had Elijah Pritchett taking pretty much all of his snaps in the last week or so at right tackle. So now you're asking a guy who hasn't prepared really for that left tackle position in the lead up to this opener to go out there and start. And there were some bumps, I thought, for Elijah Pritchett early on. But I felt like also once he settled in and had an opportunity to kind of get his feet under himself, he got better as the game wore on. So these are a couple of the things that you had happening before you could even take a snap. Early in the game, you got a couple of offensive linemen who go out with headgear issues. So you had a snap there in the first quarter, right? Parker Brailsford goes out with a headgear issue at the center position. Tyler Booker, same play, loses his helmet, so he's out. And now you got Elijah Pritchett as your left tackle. So you're looking at Gino Vandemark at center and then Olas Alinen at left guard with Pritchett as your left tackle. It was a little bit of everything, man, early on. Again, you had the picks by Keon Sabb on the defensive side. You had the deep ball to Ryan Williams, his official introduction to college football. I thought the second touchdown by Ryan Williams was as impressive as anything you'll see because the ability to stop, change directions, and after the catch, turn that play into a touchdown. Very, very interesting to say the least. You still had a snap issue. All right. You thought you were done with that. You thought the PTSD had been sort of settled down for the time being, but then you have a turnover off a snap issue with Parker Brailsford and Jalen Milroe. So again, it was uneven at times, but at the end of the day, the numbers look good, the stats look good, and we look forward to hearing from you here on the program. And let's do it. Absolutely. Tex Hyder, our guy checking in here. Let's go. Let's do it, Tex. Matt checking in. So glad you are still putting out content. Hey, look, I got to do something, right, Matt? Bob checking in here in the comments as well. Matt talks about too here. Loved how many players saw the field. It's a good point, Matt. And it wasn't just once the game was under control or in command for Alabama. Boy, that's secondary. It felt like defensively in general throughout the first half, we just saw 2.5 deep, perhaps, of defensive guys. And you knew that going into this game, there was still some competition going on at a couple of spots. Maybe the Wolf position. We saw Quay Rustal to start the game. We saw Xavier Brown, the true freshman, get the start at the corner opposite Damani Jackson. But boy, it didn't take long before we saw Jalen Mbakwe. We also saw the other defensive backs back there. Zay Mincy, another true freshman we saw pretty early in the game. The Husky position, it was Devontae Smith, but we saw a lot of Red Morgan there. Saw King Mack as the game wore on. The safety positions were Sab and Malachi Moore, but we saw Bray Hubbard rotate in there, I thought, pretty early on as well, too. So Cameron Howard, the transfer from Charlotte, we saw a good bit at safety. So plenty of guys with plenty of playing time. Walk-ons all over the place as it got late in the fourth quarter. I like that. I like it from a morale perspective, too. I think it's a good thing for your football team if you can do it. Now, look, there's a line that you got to walk between getting your guys the work that they need and being able to reward others that you're typically not going to count on as the season moves along. But it's been a while since I've seen that many people play that many snaps at the University of Alabama. It's a good point, Matt. And even on the offensive side of the ball, getting into that second offensive line, as we talked about, Saul Pritchett start out of necessity. Saul Alinen, Saul Vandemark pretty early out of necessity. Saul Joseph Ionata rep in there at the center position. Saul Rock Montgomery, Saul William Sanders, Saul Casey Poe, Naquel at offensive tackle. Boy, it was just Miles McVay at offensive tackle. Just pick a position really across this team, and you saw a lot of guys on Saturday night. So for the most part, Caden Proctor injury aside, and again, Kalen DeBoer postgame says that's something that's going to be evaluated further in the days and hours to come. You wonder about how that impacts this offensive line. Is it as simple, perhaps, as just sticking with Elijah Pritchett on the left side? I thought Wilkin Formby did some really good things in this game at the right tackle position. Ran the ball effectively as the game moved along. I like that Kalen incorporated Jalen into the red zone running game. That was something that I didn't think we saw as much of a year ago as we might have. So look, if you were wondering if Kalen was going to follow through on some of the offseason talk about making Jalen a part of that from a design perspective, I thought that question got answered pretty much on Saturday night. And you got to understand too, this was not a revealing type of game in terms of concepts and what this offense has in its book or in its tank when it comes to personnel groupings. We saw a lot of 2 tight ends. It was pretty much 12 personnel, 11 personnel, pretty basic for the most part. Depth at wide receiver, I thought, was good to see. Ryan Williams, obviously the guy everybody's going to talk about, and understandably so. I thought maybe, though, Jalen's best ball of the night came on the corner route to Jeremy Bernard. And the reason why I say that is because Jalen threw with anticipation, on time, and with accuracy. There are still some things, obviously, that they can clean up and will clean up on the offensive side, but some of the run game scheme that we had talked about. We didn't see a lot of the screen game. We didn't see a lot of the quick game with Jalen. We saw a little bit more of it, I thought, with Ty Simpson, as the game wore on. But the run game with getting those guards out in front, GT counters, things like that, pulling tackles, pulling the center. You saw all those guys used in that sort of fashion for the Alabama offensive line. That was good to see as well. So, mostly positives for Alabama in this win. Again, the injury to Proctor, most concerning, I would say. Things that can certainly be addressed and will be with South Florida coming up next. South Florida almost feels like a revenge game, even though Alabama won the game. So, in terms of focus and attention, yeah, there's guys that are no longer with the program, but the core guys, I would think Jalen Milroe is going to be excited about playing against South Florida this year, given that he was benched for South Florida a year ago. So, starting with your quarterback, capturing the tension, the undivided attention of your team this week shouldn't be much of an issue. And I think there's still a lot of competition going on. And now, depending on Proctor's status, you got to really figure out from a depth perspective. If you don't have Caden maybe for an extended stretch coming up, and I don't have any information to suggest that will be the case. I just know that I don't like seeing my starting left tackle on the sideline in a sling with his left arm in a sling. You got to now, if it is Pritchett and Formby, and we had talked about this on the channel in the last few weeks about the importance of that third guy and why, regardless of how it played out with Formby and Pritchett, you still needed one of those guys to be a legit third option. Well, depending on what the situation is with Caden, you may be really digging for a third guy here in the coming days this week. So a lot of good stuff. The kicking game about what you wanted it to be. It was interesting to see Cole Adams back there deep on punts. Obviously the kickoff return game, that wasn't much of an issue because you pitched a shutout in the game. But pretty much what you would expect. I know Alabama was a 31.5-point favorite. I think it comes as a surprise to some folks that maybe there was this sort of margin. But look, this is going to perhaps be an opportunistic defense. And if they can get extra possessions, especially with field position for what this offense has the potential to be, these type of outputs against teams that aren't quite up to the standard of Alabama shouldn't be all that surprising. And really, when you looked around the SEC today, the better teams in the league against inferior opponents just shellacked those teams. Whether you're talking about Tennessee, whether you're talking about Auburn, whether you're talking about Ole Miss, Alabama, 40-point first halves were the minimum, it seemed like, around the league. So more and more that seems to be the case in college football these days. Defensively, again, kind of a three-man front. Western Kentucky was going to spread you out. We saw that from Tyson Helton's offense with TJ Finley at the quarterback position. So you had this sort of 3-3-5 working where you had your three down linemen. You had your two inside linebackers, whether you're talking about Jahad Campbell, Deontay Lawson. Also, we saw a lot of Justin Jefferson in the game. But then when it got to obvious passing situations, we saw some creativity with the personnel. Really didn't see a dime package from Alabama. But what we did see was a shift to, moving Jahad Campbell up to an edge to go along with, say, a Q Robinson. Q had the only sack for Alabama in the game. Alabama did have 7 or 8 tackles for loss. And then, play with kind of a four linebacker look, and then nickel behind it, and then bring in a Jamarian Latham or leave in a Jamarian Latham, maybe an LT Overton in that pass rush look as well. So we got a glimpse at some situational things from Alabama that we weren't entirely sure about on the defensive side of the ball, but we did think that depth, especially up front, would be something we would see a good bit of from the outset. And that was definitely the case. And you knew Tim Keenan was going to play a lot. You knew Tim Smith was going to play a lot. You figured Jaheim Otis would be a factor. You figured Latham Overton, those guys at that bandit position. It all sort of played out that way. But we did see a lot of Damon Payne as a rotational guy. We did see James Smith. Talked about that pass rush package that we saw from Alabama. James Smith was a part of that too early in the football game. So we did get some partial answers, at least to some of the questions we had, maybe more so in terms of, how is this team unit wise going to go about things when you get into situations like 3rd and long or goal line, short yardage. And then, depth at the Wolf position, a lot of Quay Rusal, some Q Robinson. We saw Keanu Coote a little bit later. The depth at linebacker with some of those young linebackers, Okoronkwo, we saw out there on special teams, and also at inside linebacker. We also saw another true freshman, I thought, at linebacker in Caden Jones, the freshman from Asheville, North Carolina. He's a good-looking young player, 6'4", about 230 pounds. I mean, some of these freshmen that Alabama has brought in, they don't look like your typical freshman, that's for sure. Tex Tider checking in here. He says he thought it was good to see some fire from Kalen DeBoer. I tell you, Tex, I thought it was interesting. It's not to say that I didn't think Kalen DeBoer had that in him, but to see him getting after the officials like he was with headset gate going on before we even had a snap. Yeah, I thought that was pretty interesting. If you were wondering if he was just kind of this, aw shucks, meager sort of soft-spoken guy, kind of like everybody's favorite uncle or something, he did show you some fire, and he did show it, I thought, in terms of dissatisfaction. You could tell there were times he was not pleased with the level of play. So, I think that's not necessarily a bad thing either. So what we'll do is we'll pull up too. We've got the stat broadcast box that we're going to share here on the screen. Just kind of go through it with some numbers again. Alabama threw for 266 yards on just 18 pass attempts, 9 apiece for Jalen and Ty. Thought Ty came in very early, especially very crisp, very self-assured, very confident. That was impressive to see. And we talked about, Jalen in the red zone, but it was also Ty. Ty had the rushing touchdown in the game as well. So 3 rushing touchdowns from your top 2 quarterbacks. Elsewhere at the quarterback position, it was Dylan Lonergan, number 3. Played all those running backs. Justice Haynes, 4 carries, 102 yards, had the long touchdown of 85. That was a beauty, wasn't it? I think that was a guard tackle counter. He brought around Jaden and Wilkin, right? Wrapped him around, got that pretty much cleared out. I was interested to see on that run if Justice could finish it in the end zone, because he kind of reminds me a little bit of Damian Harris. And so, as you might recall, Damian used to catch some grief early on in his career, especially. It seemed like he would bust those runs and then get caught inside the 10 or not be able to finish in the end zone. But Justice Haynes finished that run in the end zone. We saw Jam Miller 5 times for 54 yards and a touchdown. You had 5 different players with rushing touchdowns. Daniel Hill, the true freshman, with his first rushing score. I thought Kevin Riley did some good things in the game when we got to see him. Richard Young as the 3rd back. I wasn't surprised to see Kendrick Law get a touch or a carry in the way that he did early in the game. So rushing wise, you run for 334 on 47 carries. That's a 7.1 yard per carry. You'll take that. And again, first half, Jalen averaged 28 yards per pass attempt. It's gonna skew the numbers a little bit. The explosiveness, though, very much on display. And then a lot of receivers that you got help from. As the game moved on, saw more from Caleb Odom there in the second half, the talented true freshman, but primarily your top 3, 4, 5 guys were Kendrick, Jeremy, Ryan, Kobe Prentice. And then we got into some Emmanuel Henderson, and Cole as well, Cole Adams. And then you got down the road a little bit more, and you saw some Caleb Odom, 2 catches, 23 yards. We saw Jaron Hamilton there in the second half, tight ends, pretty much the 3 or 4 we were expecting to see. CJ Dupree, Robbie Oots, Josh Cuevas, Danny Lewis. Those were the first 3 or 4 guys on the field Saturday night. But boy, just a ton of players on both sides of the football. And again, defensively, you had 8 tackles for loss for Alabama in the game. Excuse me, 7 tackles for loss. Those came from 6 different players. 8 pass breakups, played just a ton of DBs. I thought that was really valuable to be able to get guys like Mbakwe and Mincy. And Deshaun Jones had a very nice pass breakup there in the second half. You know, those corners and those Husky candidates, Red Morgan to go along with Devontae Smith, and, you know, all those guys that are in that mix. Bray Hubbard had 6 tackles in the game, five solos. One of them was a TFL. So a lot of good stuff. Again, some things that are going to have to be addressed, and you know that's going to happen in an opener, and not just an opener, but again, a first time pass through for a new staff. And so Alabama gets the job done in very impressive fashion. I talked about the defensive line depth, but you know we saw Jordan Renaud uh, in there as well. We saw Edric Hill in there as well. Um, 8 pass breakups, 7 different guys contributing to that total. We talked about that earlier. That's good news. That's good stuff. Um, Matt checking in once again. We haven't seen that aggressiveness to attack the screenplays lately, and the pursuit speed was excellent. And I talked about this throughout the week too, Matt. And I still think this is going to be the case. I don't think because Alabama did some good things against the perimeter game, it'll signal the last that they see of it. Especially if you watch Georgia against Clemson earlier today, they went after Clemson. Georgia did on the perimeter, and that was without Trevor Etienne. So that may have had something to do with the plan. But teams are going to continue to look to go out there, I think, more so than between the numbers. You know, Keon Sabb jumping a couple of balls tonight. You know what Malachi Moore brings to the middle of that defense. We knew up the middle of this defense would be fine. And I do think the perimeter answered the bell, especially as the game wore on. But that's still going to be, I think, where South Florida this week, maybe Wisconsin. Who knows with Wisconsin offensively? But Georgia down the road, with Missouri down the road. Those are teams that are still going to look to get after you on the perimeter, I think, pretty good. Donald checking in here. Thought this went about as good as it could have. Great win, but things to work on. Absolutely, Donald. That's an opener for you. Uh, I think that you know there's some security to take though, because of the leadership of this team, which sounds kind of unusual, but I think you've got the right people in place too at critical positions that you can have self-policing, not just coming from your coaching staff, because you know that's kind of like when you have kids like I do. I can say what my kids need to hear, but that doesn't mean they either hear it or want to hear it. But when it comes from a peer, that seems to impact them tenfold more sometimes than it does when I deliver it or my wife delivers it. So, you know, I think that this team has the intangibles, the infrastructure that they can be honest, I think, with each other and with themselves in terms of where improvement needs to happen. You know, Kalen was asked in the post game tonight about, is there such a thing as being almost too explosive? Like you're not sustaining drives maybe as much as you would like because you're hitting for so many of these explosive plays with Justice Haynes and Ryan Williams, and you know your quarterback's able to do it with his legs too. And I liked it because Kalen did not apologize for explosiveness. Um, he said he's not going to turn down explosives for the sake of sustaining drives. You know, I don't know many coaches that will. Coaches love explosive plays. I think this team, though, in terms of situational offense, like I said earlier, I was encouraged by it because when they had some red zone opportunities because of Jalen and what he can do with his legs, and Ty did it as well. Um, it very much looks like the quarterback is going to be a central figure with the run game, especially in the red zone. I like that. I like that with the guys Alabama has. You saw Dylan Lonergan when he got in there, had a nice scramble. What, 16 yards? Hey, Dylan can run too. So it's not just something that's limited to one guy in that quarterback room. It can be a part of who they are because really 1 through 3 right now at the quarterback position, they're able to do that. Chad Shoemake here in the chat in the show comments says, I heard coaches comment on Proctor, but what is your opinion of what the injury could be? Chad, I don't really know. It just sounds like it was a fluky situation. Pregame warmups, they do go some 11 on 11, but it's nothing like full speed, full contact. But sometimes those type of things happen, and it's very very rare and very seldom that it does. But you kind of hate it for Caden because it's been just a weird, wild sort of off season. He kind of brought it on himself. I understand that, but this guy was eager to jump back in there. That sense of normalcy of being with his team, and that's before you talk about the potential that he has, and to see that happen. First and foremost, you don't like it for him, but I don't really know enough to speculate. I said it earlier. You never like to see your starting left tackle in a sling, but again, perhaps for precautionary issues, we don't know. I do know this: Jeff Allen and his staff are beyond exceptional. I know Alabama has, a sports science center now that is the equivalent of um, the Andrews Clinic North, or I don't know, maybe it's not North because Birmingham's North, but you know what I'm saying. Um, so the resources are in play. If there's any way to get Caden Bratt back quickly, I would expect that to be the case. But what we do know, a lot of guys played, a lot of yards piled up, a lot of points. And, defensively, again, if I told you going into this game, I think the bigger surprise for Alabama fans would have maybe been Western Kentucky not scoring. Alabama getting a shutout in this game than maybe Alabama scoring 63 points. Because when you think about this offense, you return your quarterback, you return some key pieces on that offensive line and at the skill positions. You're bringing in a guy like Kalen DeBoer with an offensive pedigree that's really second to none to go along with Nick Sheridan. So you're kind of thinking, this is a team that's going to score mid 40s in this game at least, maybe into the 50s. But I know some folks that I interacted with throughout the week here on the channel just thought that 14, the thought of 14 points, I think the implied total analytically that was run, Chase Goodbread of the Tuscaloosa News on Talking Tide, we talked about this the other night here on the channel, was that Western would score 14 points. And I know some people are like, that's not happening. Western's going to score in the 20s. Well, they didn't really sniff the 20s. I mean, they did have the field goal attempt, um, that was no good. But look, Alabama was emptying the bench too in the fourth quarter. I think 70 was easy if that's what Alabama wanted to do. You had the personal foul on Ty that eliminated the interception there in the second half, but penalties again, too many. That's going to be a talking point. I have no doubt about that coming up here very, very soon. And it's also interesting to note, too, Alabama is going to practice on Sundays under DeBoer. And so Monday will be the off day. So it's going to be a quick turnaround. Now, I would think Sunday's going to entail more of the previous game cleanup. And while it's fresh, addressing some of the things maybe that you didn't like from that Saturday game. But it's going to be a quicker turnaround under Kalen DeBoer. And while it's still fresh, the ability to make those needed corrections and adjustments. What do you think of special teams? I mean, again, there just wasn't a whole lot to take away from it. Um, you know, Graham Nicholson made his PATs. I think special teams was about the way you wanted it. Just pretty much extra points, right? Extra points, not very much in the way of punting. How many times did James Burnett punt? I remember the one punt. I guess in the second half, he punted 3 times for a 50.7 yard average. Had a long of 54. I think it was the 54. It was really nice there. Hung it up. Um, and so, just not really any opportunities on kickoff return. Cole Adams did have 5 punt returns for 42 yards with a long of 12. Probably the best thing I liked about Cole back there was that he took care of the football. You know, a lot of confidence in a young guy to put him back there. I mean, I know it's something that he's done in the past, but that was good to see. And so, really, from a turnover perspective, a pretty clean game for Alabama. And again, when you take it away twice, like Keon Sabb did, and you turn it into 14 points, you're typically going to be in a pretty good situation. All right. Anything else before we get out of here? There you go. Chad, thank you, my friend. Donald says this team seems hungry. They were excited and they played with a lot of energy. Made some mistakes, no doubt about it. But I didn't get the sense that it was a team that looked like it had been through an exceptionally grueling preseason. Seemed to have plenty of energy, and it doesn't hurt when you play pretty much everybody on the damn sideline. Which, hey, again, I think that's a great thing. I'm happy for a lot of those guys. I mean, to be able to get in there and see action in a season opener, uh, that was good to see. Again, we appreciate you tuning in here on Reier on YouTube. If you haven't subscribed to the channel as of yet, hit that subscribe button right now. There's a notification bell there too. Hit that bell. That way you're alerted to all of our content as it drops here on Reier on YouTube. Give us a thumbs up if you don't mind. That would help us out tremendously as well. Want to remind you, Chase Goodbread going to be coming up with me very soon in the next day or so with another edition of Talking Tide as we wrap Western Kentucky and look ahead to South Florida next Saturday at Bryant-Denny Stadium. Also planning to do some video review of some kind here on the channel. So be on the lookout for that as well. Until then, Travis Reier, thanking you once again for joining us. Have a great rest of your Saturday evening. Be safe. And until next time, so long, everybody.